Hello, welcome back. My name is Dr. Christopher Gennari, and this is Great Big History Podcast. In this episode, we do Christianity in Japan. So, like most of East Asia, the Portuguese are the first ones to show up. Portuguese missionaries show up in 1549. They bring with them their European guns. It's always, I got Jesus in one hand and I got a musket in the other, and do you want to talk? So they bring their European guns, which gets them in the door. They also bring in the Chinese trade, which we've talked about. The Ming boycotted Japan because of the Japanese pirates, the Woku pirates. And what this meant was money. Portuguese missionaries are making money. Portuguese merchants are making money, and they're getting allies. And basically, the deal was, hey, we'll get you more stuff if you love Jesus. And so they actually get some converted daimyo, nobility. You get 86 who are allied with Oda Nobunaga. And so in making this, and it makes sense, right? Oda is making a gunpowder army, so he needs an alliance with the Portuguese. He can't become Christian. That would kind of bring big problems. But he can ally with the nobility that are Christian, that become Christian. And that opens up the Portuguese trade. So good. Hideyoshi, on the other hand, sees these Christian daimyo as bad. But he wants to invade Korea and Ming China, and he needs the guns. And he's not so happy with the missionaries, the Portuguese missionaries, converting people to Christianity. But he needs the guns and the Chinese trade that they represent. There's a problem. And that problem is, well, slavery. Now, the Japanese had slavery. It's slavery in war captives, and it's very traditional. Pretty much all of societies, Rome did it, the Greeks did it. You capture people in war, they became your laborers. So this is very traditional. But the Portuguese are bringing in a whole new level of slave trade. Because the Portuguese, in 1520, discovered Brazil, and they're starting to create sugar plantations in Brazil. And because of the smallpox and the diseases, then the indigenous populations of the New World are dying. And so you need new peoples. Now, we know that the vast majority of those new peoples will be African. Will be black African from West Africa. But the Portuguese have a Indian Ocean and Pacific Empire. And so, hey, you got slaves? We'll buy your slaves and we'll ship them to India, to Africa, to Brazil. Now, the Japanese slaves were not used as heavily ordinary laborers, the way that sub-Saharan Africans will be used. But slavery is still slavery, and it's not good, and so these people will be used as sex slaves, as bureaucrats, as skilled labor. In many ways, it looks like European slavery of the Roman Empire and the early Middle Ages. Hideyoshi is selling captured Koreans into slavery. He's bringing back from Korea as he's invading Korea. And so both Portugal and Spain buy them and ship those peoples all the way around the globe back to Mexico, to Mexico and to Europe. But Hideyoshi also needs the loyalty of Japanese lords, and they're not so happy about all these Japanese people being carted off and sent into Portuguese slavery. It's one thing for them to use Japanese slaves, much less Korean slaves. It's another thing for the Portuguese to take them and ship them to the far ends of the earth. And so in 1587, Hideyoshi demands the end to Portuguese slavery. And to keep the trade open, and to keep converting people, they agree. There wasn't that many people they were using anyway, and this is one reason why the Portuguese will become much more reliant on African slaves to work, especially in Brazil. In 1595, the Portuguese king outlaws Asian slavery completely to keep the trade in Christianity going. And so what does this tell us? It tells us strong governments can stop European slavery. Whether it's in China, as we talked about, or in Japan, it is a strong government that can turn to the Portuguese and say, much less the Dutch or the English later, and say, no, you're not going to take our people as slaves. And as just an aside, when we talk about African slavery, it's true there too. The people who are going to be taken as slaves are not part of the larger African empires of the Niger River, of the Sudan, of northern East Africa, and so they weren't protected, basically. So strong governments equal a stop to European slavery. And yet it doesn't really stop. Just like African slavery didn't stop when it was supposed to. The Portuguese continued to buy poor kids in Japan and China well into the 1800s and ship them back. They're exotic. You know, an orphan girl has no protection. You could ship her back. Or buy her from her parents. You promise education and ship them back to Portugal. And because there are so few Japanese people in the European world, they have no crew. They can't revolt. They can't even be protected. And so there's always this odd mixture. Because there's always this small minority, this tiny minority in Lisbon of Japanese slaves. Problem 2, Hideyoshi has a young son in 1593 and wants him to be heir. And so what does he do? Hideyoshi does what any good lord would do. Murder all the extended family. All the people who could. All those uncles. All those cousins. All those people who could revolt against the son. Part of that is also to go after, quote unquote, disloyal or questionable lords. And the Christian lords, the 86 Christian lords, become part of that. You know, they're kind of European. They've taken on European stuff. They, you know, maybe they want to overthrow, maybe they're more loyal to the Pope or the Portuguese king. maybe they want to overthrow my son when he takes over. And so what he starts to do is eject the missionaries and murder the European allies. It's a Game of Thrones, Red Wedding, get rid of all of your enemies. This is known as the 26 Martyrs of Nagasaki. We have the painting of it. There's actually a movie by Scorsese called Silence, which is about this event. And this is the closing off of Japan. In many ways, this is the most famous event in the closing off of Japan from Europeans, where Japan basically puts out a sign that says, closed. Don't call us, we'll call you. They're being ejected out of Korea by the Ming armies. Hideyoshi is trying to firm up the loyalty of his lords so they don't revolt against or kill his son. And so you're getting rid of people who are not dependable. And that's basically, after your extended family, the Christians. Now, Hideyoshi dies in 1597. So what's created? Well, the son is still young. And so there's a council of 5 that are going to rule Japan as shogun, as regents, until the boy is old enough. So they're loyal to Hideyoshi, but not necessarily to each other. And what happens is they fall out, as happens in Japanese history continuously. These marcher lords look at each other. This is like the romance of the 3 kingdoms in China. They look at each other and say, I could share this power, or I could kill all of you and take over myself. And like Stalin does in the post-Lenin era in Russia, Tokugawa wins. Tokugawa Ieyasu wins. He's the last of the councils standing. And so what we get is unity under the Tokugawa clan. Christianity has been eradicated, more or less. There's always going to be some individuals who are Christians and some small groups who are Christians, but they have no political power. Hideyoshi's dynasty is destroyed, and the Tokugawas in 1600 have won, are now in charge. All right, so that ends our Christianity period. We are going to pick up in the next phase of the closure of Japan and then the reopening 200 years later, and pick up there. Thank you very much.